My millionaire uncle discovered I was living in my car while my trust fund kept his business afloat and my bedroom was a gym. I took control and recovered every single dollar. My name is Jessica, and honestly, I never thought my life would take this turn. Everything changed the day my wealthy Uncle Roy saw me working in a coffee shop. I was thin, exhausted, and barely smiled. He looked at me with surprise and sadness, and that moment marked the beginning of a radical change in my destiny. I grew up in a loving home in a quiet Boston neighborhood. My earliest memories are filled with laughter, security, and family warmth. My father, Michael, owned a successful building supply company that he had built from the ground up through hard work and discipline. Even though she worked a lot, she always found time for me. Sundays were sacred. We'd have pancakes together for breakfast, then go to the park, and end the day watching movies at home. My mother, Angela, was the heart of our home. She had a special gift for making everyone feel loved. She knew each of my friends by name, was actively involved in my school, and never missed one of my performances. Her chocolate chip cookies were famous in the neighborhood, and our house was always full of people. She also had a beautiful garden, where we spent hours planting flowers every spring. She said that patience was learned by watching life grow in the earth. We lived in a comfortable 4-bedroom house with a large backyard. We weren't rich, but we never lacked anything. My room was painted lavender, my favorite color, and my father built me a seat by the window where I used to lose myself in reading for hours. On every birthday, my parents decorated the house with balloons and streamers so that when I woke up, I would feel how special I was to them. My father had an older brother, Roy, who worked in real estate. He lived in a mansion in the suburbs and traveled constantly for work, but he maintained a close relationship with my father. They had lunch together every Thursday, a tradition they kept for years. My uncle didn't have children of his own, so he poured all his affection into me. When I turned 10, he took us all to Disney World, a trip I still cherish. Family holidays were unique moments. Thanksgiving at our house, with Mom cooking for days, and Christmas at my uncle's luxurious residence, where a gigantic tree adorned the living room and there were always presents for everyone. He made me feel part of a strong family, with roots and traditions. What I didn't know then was that my father was quietly but steadily securing my future. Since I was born, he had created a trust fund for my education, to which he contributed month after month, even foregoing some personal luxuries. His dream was to see me graduate, something he never got to achieve. He constantly told me that education is the one thing no one can take away from you, Jessica. Everything changed when I turned 12. Mom began suffering from severe headaches that wouldn't go away. After multiple tests, the diagnosis was devastating, an aggressive, inoperable brain tumor. Doctors said she had 6 months to live. She fought for 8. Our home transformed into a space of care and silence. Between medications, nurses, and hospital visits, the life I knew crumbled away. Medical expenses grew at an unstoppable pace, even with insurance. Dad started working longer hours, though he always tried to be there. I would hear him negotiating with insurance companies and hospitals in the early hours of the morning, looking for ways to pay the bills. While other girls my age spent their weekends having sleepovers, I learned to administer medications, help my mother walk to the bathroom, and cook simple meals so Dad and I could eat. We became a team, united by our love for Mom and our determination to make her comfortable in her final months. When Mom passed away, spring was just beginning. The day of her funeral was sunny, with trees in bloom, a painful contrast to our grief. I remember my Uncle Roy with us at the cemetery, his hand on my father's shoulder. They both seemed to have aged years in just a few months. After Mom died, Dad threw himself into his work. I took care of the house and made sure dinner was ready. Sometimes we would sit in silence looking at family photos, sharing memories without needing to talk much. My relationship with my uncle also changed. He started visiting less often, and our Thursday lunches disappeared. Over time, I learned that they had disagreements about Mom's medical decisions, which created distance between the siblings. Despite everything, Dad never stopped contributing to my education fund. It was his way of ensuring I had a different future. 2 years later, Dad met Terrace at a business event. She worked in the marketing department of one of his client companies. She was elegant, self-assured, and seemed genuinely interested in me. He asked me about my studies, my friends, and my hobbies. After seeing him so withdrawn for so long, it was comforting to see a smile on my father's face. Terrace had 2 children from a previous marriage. Cody, 17, tall, athletic, and with entrepreneurial aspirations like his mother. And Madison, 15, a quiet and artistic girl. I remember our first dinner together. Cody was talking animatedly with Dad about the business. Madison complimented a necklace I was wearing, and Terrace made sure to include us all in the conversation. That night, I thought maybe we could start a real family. 6 months later, Dad and Terrace got married in an intimate ceremony. At first, I was happy for him, though I couldn't help thinking that everything was moving too fast. Even so, I wanted to be understanding. Terrace moved into our house with her children, and suddenly our quiet home was bustling again. Cody took over the guest room, and Madison settled into the small office my father had converted into her bedroom. The changes were subtle at first. When Dad was around, Terrace was kind, asking about my day, praising my accomplishments, and even including me in family conversations. However, as soon as he left for work, her attitude changed. Her smile became forced, and her questions sounded more like an interrogation. She started constantly comparing me to Madison, always putting me at a disadvantage. Cody and Madison quickly learned to mimic their mother's behavior. They weren't directly cruel, but little by little they made me feel out of place. They made plans without including me, shared private jokes, and altered common areas to suit their needs. My opinion in the house began to lose value. One afternoon I came home from school and found some of my things moved out of my room to make room for Madison's art supplies. "Your room has the best light, and besides, you should share to bond as sisters," Terrace said with an icy smile. Dad thought it was a good idea, especially since she assured him that we had both agreed to it together. My mother's photos gradually disappeared from the common areas. When I asked, Terrace replied that she had carefully stored them because it's not healthy to dwell on the past. She also said that now the important thing was to focus on our new family. That first December, the Christmas decorations Mom and I had collected never left their boxes. Family recipes were replaced by Terrace, and our routines changed completely. Dad worked longer hours than ever, and Terrace encouraged him, telling him how much she admired his dedication. "You take care of providing, darling, and I'll take care of everything at home," she used to say. And she kept that promise, though she did so by molding every aspect of our lives to her liking. She would listen to conversations about money in which she suggested changes to the business or insisted on expenses related to her children. The children's activities were necessary. Even if expensive, Cody would need a car for college next year. Dad accepted everything, grateful that she showed interest in his work. In contrast, my own needs became secondary. When he asked for financial support for a school trip, Terrace questioned him. "University costs a lot, Jessica," she said. "We can't waste money on whims." She said this even though Dad had set up an education fund precisely for those expenses. The distance between my father and me grew. Terrace was skilled at creating tension and then presenting herself as the mediator. "Jessica is at that difficult age," she would tell my father, downplaying any disagreements. He always implied that my behavior was an obstacle to the harmony of the new family. Even so, I tried to maintain my bond with Dad. On Saturdays, I would get up early to have breakfast with him before everyone else. We would talk about my classes, her work, or reminisce about Mom. But those intimate moments gradually faded away because Terrace organized family activities that required getting up early, eliminating our private conversations. I tried to understand. After all, he seemed to find some peace in this new routine, and he didn't want to disrupt what seemed to be his stability after so many years of sadness since Mom's death. I threw myself into my studies and kept telling myself that, when I got to university, I would finally have my own space. A year after the wedding, Dad's business started showing signs of trouble. I would see him at the dining room table, surrounded by papers, frowning. Terrace was always by his side, offering him coffee, massaging his shoulders, assuring him that she would support him in everything. She even started accompanying him to meetings and dinners with clients, introducing herself as his partner in everything. By the time I turned 16, I no longer felt like I belonged at home. I shared a room with Madison, which had been completely redecorated in her style. Family meals revolved around Cody's sports and Madison's art classes. My academic achievements were mentioned in passing, but they were always overshadowed by news about Terrace's children. It was clear who was the center of attention in the family, and who was relegated to the sidelines. The call came on a Tuesday, in the middle of chemistry class. The school secretary asked me to leave, her expression somber. In the office, Principal Martinez informed me of the accident. Dad had been hit by another car while on his way to a client meeting. His condition was critical at Boston Memorial Hospital. When I arrived, Terrace was already there with Cody and Madison. She was speaking to the doctors in a firm, almost authoritarian tone. She barely acknowledged me with a gesture and continued the conversation. I heard terms like internal bleeding and minimal brain activity. When they allowed me to see him, he was hooked up to machines, his face unrecognizable from the blows. I took his hand and told him I loved him, reminding him of that sandcastle we had built on the beach last summer. I promised him I would make him proud, though I don't know if he heard me. 3 hours later, he was gone. At 17, I was left all alone in the world. The hospital became a whirlwind of voices and faces. My Uncle Roy appeared, his face aged by the news. He hugged me tightly and whispered, "I'm so sorry, Jessica." But Terrace immediately pulled him aside to speak with the private. I didn't see him again until the funeral. The following days were surreal. Terrace took complete control of the arrangements without consulting me. She chose a church Dad never attended, with a minister who never met him. She bought an expensive coffin and showy flowers, portraying herself as the heartbroken widow. During the service, she gave a tearful speech about her brief but passionate marriage, placing her children and herself at the center of the grief, as if they were the only legitimate mourners. I sat in the front row of the funeral, my mind numb and disconnected from what was happening. None of this felt like a true tribute to my father, the man I knew. No one mentioned her passion for jazz, her terrible dad jokes, or her tradition of making heart-shaped pancakes every Valentine's Day. The person described in that speech seemed like a stranger to me, as if they were talking about someone I didn't know. My Uncle Roy was there, though he kept his distance from Terrace. As the ceremony ended, she discreetly approached me and handed me a card. "Call me when things have calmed down a bit. We need to talk," she whispered. I didn't have time to reply because Terrace immediately appeared at my side, leading me toward some distant relatives who had come to offer their condolences. 3 days after the funeral, we met with the family lawyer, Mr. Johnson, for the reading of the will. There I discovered that my father had changed his will shortly after marrying Terrace. The family business had been left in her name, with the condition that, when the time came, I would be the one to continue it. The house was also granted to her, although it was stipulated that I could continue living there until I finished my university studies. Most importantly, the trust fund for my education remained untouched, but Terrace was listed as the trustee until I turned 25. Mr. Johnson explained that this fund was substantial enough to cover a full degree at a prestigious university and even postgraduate studies. Furthermore, there would be another inheritance I would receive when I turned 25, which would give me a solid foundation to begin my adult life. Terrace listened with a satisfied expression, nodding at each explanation and occasionally taking my hand with a force that seemed more like an act of control than support. As we left the office, she immediately began to talk about the need to manage assets responsibly in difficult economic times. The change in her was immediate. That very night, she called a family meeting. She sat on the sofa with Cody and Madison on either side, forming a united front, while I occupied alone the armchair that had been my father's favorite. "Now that everything is in order, we must talk about practical matters," she said firmly. "Jessica, you're moving into the small room upstairs. Cody will be using your room because he needs space for his exercise equipment and to study." I objected immediately, reminding her that it was my childhood bedroom full of memories. But her gaze hardened. "This house now belongs to me, and I will decide how every space is used. Your father would want what's best for everyone, not just you." That same night, Cody and Madison helped her move my things to the attic, a cramped room with sloping ceilings and poor heating. Many of my belongings mysteriously disappeared in the process, including mementos of my mother and family photographs. Within weeks, any trace of my parents' life had vanished. The old portraits were replaced with new ones showing only Therese, her children, and occasionally my father. It was as if my mother had never existed, and as if my own childhood had been erased from the family history. Living together became increasingly hostile. Therese criticized me for everything, from my appearance to my study habits. "Your father worked himself to death to give you everything. The least you can do is show gratitude to this family," she would repeat. Madison, though less direct, sided with her mother and brother, watching my every move and reporting everything I did. Therese controlled my every expense, demanding receipts and explanations for everything, even school supplies and clothes. "As your administrator, I have a responsibility to use wisely the money your father entrusted to me," she always said. While Cody received a new car to go to college and Madison attended an expensive summer art course, I had to justify even the most basic things. My senior year of high school became a test of endurance. I spent most of my time at school, joining clubs and study groups, so I wouldn't have to go home. I found a part-time job at a bookstore and kept every dollar in a private account, far from Therese's reach. I threw myself into my studies, hoping to earn a scholarship that would help me become independent. The emotional abuse was constant, though always subtle enough that others didn't notice. Therese never hit me, but her words were like knives, constantly reminding me that I was only there because of my father's charity, a burden I'd accepted out of obligation. She compared me to her children, minimizing my every achievement and highlighting my flaws. The only thing that kept me going was the idea that this situation would be temporary. College would be my escape, my chance to start over. I applied to several institutions, hoping for scholarships that would supplement my funds and give me freedom. Each acceptance letter was a light in the darkness. The day the notification arrived from Northeastern University, my first choice, I cried tears of joy alone. I had been accepted into the business administration program, just what I had dreamed of. At that moment, I could almost feel my father's hand on my shoulder and hear his voice saying, "I knew you could do it, yes." The excitement faded quickly when I told Terrace. She barely glanced at the letter and commented coldly, "Northeastern is very expensive. I'm not sure the fund will stretch that far, especially with the company going through difficulties." Perhaps you should start at a community college. I stood firm. I reminded him that my father had anticipated those expenses and that the fund was more than sufficient. Reluctantly, he agreed, though he made it clear that every expense would be scrutinized. As administrator, I have to make sure the money lasts for 4 years, she said. There will be no luxuries. Thus began a new battle, justifying tuition fees one by one, course by course. Even textbooks were questioned as an unnecessary expense. When I asked for a laptop for my classes, she insisted I use the family's old desktop computer. Every conversation about money ended with the same reminder, how generous she was being with me, and how grateful I should be for her careful management of the family's resources. Even with those tensions, my first 2 years at Northeastern were a welcome respite from life with Terrace. I lived in a dorm, sharing a tiny room with another freshman named Jessica, who quickly became a great friend. That cramped space was a true haven compared to the hostile environment of what had once been my home. I threw myself into my studies, participated in various student organizations, and began to build an independent life, free from Terrace influence. I limited my visits home to the bare minimum, almost always on important holidays. Each return was harder than the last. Terrace would spend the first hour listing all the ways I disappointed her, and then she'd recount in detail Cody's successes in business school and Madison's artistic progress. My room gradually emptied, more and more of my things ending up stored in damp boxes in the garage. The summer after my sophomore year, I managed to land an internship in Boston, which allowed me to avoid going back home. Terrace didn't like it, but she couldn't dispute the professional value of the opportunity. That summer I experienced for the first time what real independence meant. I rented a small sublet apartment, learned to manage my own budget, and was able to live without the shadow of her meddling. Things changed drastically in my 3rd year. Terrace summoned me to her house for what she called an important financial meeting. She sat me down in the dining room with spreadsheets spread out and explained that the family business was in trouble. "The economy hit us hard," she said solemnly. However, I had read that the construction industry was booming. According to her, difficult decisions had to be made, and hers was to drastically reduce the money allocated to my education. She stated that the trust had underperformed and that a temporary reallocation of resources was necessary. My tuition would be covered, but room and board, books, and all living expenses would become my responsibility. When I asked to see the trust statements, her tone shifted to a defensive one. "I don't appreciate your lack of trust, Jessica." "Your father, Michael, appointed me as administrator because he trusted me to make the right decisions. If you can't accept that, perhaps you should pay for your entire university education." Desperate for answers, I went to the university's legal aid office. The law student who helped me explained that challenging an administrator required concrete evidence and legal resources that I didn't have. Without access to the actual financial records, all I could do was adapt to this new reality. I took on more hours at the campus bookstore and got a second job as a waitress at a nearby restaurant. My grades suffered because of the workload, but I was determined to finish my degree. I cut back on every expense I could, ate lunch at work most of the time, and bought used books. That summer, I had no choice but to move back in with Terrace temporarily, while I looked for affordable housing near campus. What I found devastated me. My room was gone. In its place was a home gym with a treadmill and a set of weights that were clearly brand new. There was no bed, no desk, no trace of my life there. My belongings were piled up in the garage, many damaged by damp or simply missing. When I confronted her, she seemed surprised by my reaction. "You're hardly ever here," she said. "It didn't make sense to leave a room empty when Cody needed a space to exercise. You can sleep on the couch when you come to visit," she added coldly. "You can sleep on the couch when you come to visit." That same night, while I was going through my damp boxes in the garage, I overheard Terrace talking to Cody in the kitchen. They didn't know I was close enough to hear them. "The trust has saved us," Terrace confessed. "Without him, we would have lost the business last year." Cody asked how long they could keep using him. "Until he turns 25 or graduates. The terms are clear, but I've been careful, withdrawing only small amounts. By the time I could make a claim, the money will already be back in the company." Cody expressed doubts, but she reassured him, saying he has no proof or legal recourse against us. "Your father, Michael, left everything perfectly documented. On paper, it just looks like a failed investment, nothing more." I felt sick listening to them. They were robbing me, slowly dismantling the inheritance my father had set aside for my future. The supposed company crisis was probably just an excuse to seize my trust fund. That night, lying on the uncomfortable sofa of what had once been my home, I made a decision. I wouldn't confront them yet. I would find a way to support myself, document everything, and gather evidence for when I could really fight back. I couldn't give them a reason to cut me off completely from what little money I had left. The next morning, I told Therese I had found a place to stay in Boston with some friends. It was a lie, but I needed to leave before my anger betrayed me. I grabbed what little I could salvage from the garage, coldly said goodbye to that family that never accepted me, and drove back to the city with no plan other than to survive. My first night sleeping in my car, in a Walmart parking lot on the outskirts of Boston, was a nightmare. Every noise startled me. Every passing car seemed like a threat. I placed my few belongings in the back seat and trunk, improvising a sleeping space in the reclined driver's seat. My old Honda Civic, a gift from my father for my 16th birthday before he died, became my only home. With 2 months still to go before the semester started, I needed a job immediately and a routine that would allow me to live discreetly in my car. My savings wouldn't last long, and I had to appear normal so no one would suspect anything. The next morning, I signed up for a 24-hour gym membership. For $30 a month, I had access to clean showers, restrooms, and a place to hang out when the weather was bad. I learned to arrive early, around 5:30 in the morning, when there were hardly any people around. There I could get ready, change my clothes, and start the day without raising suspicion. Finding safe places to park became an art I had to quickly perfect. For months, I followed a routine that seemed designed for me to survive undetected. I alternated between various places to sleep, sometimes the Walmart parking lot, other times a quiet street near the university, and when I needed to remain inconspicuous, I used the mall's parking garage, where security was minimal. I never stayed more than 2 nights in the same place, fearing someone would notice me. In emergencies, I used hospital parking lots, which were always busy and relatively safe for a woman alone. I got a job at a coffee shop near campus that opened at 6 in the morning. That schedule fit with my new sleep cycle, and the manager appreciated my willingness to cover shifts that others turned down. The tips were decent. I had free coffee and discounted food, but most importantly, I had a legitimate place to spend my day. To supplement my income, I worked weekends and evenings at a clothing store in the mall. Between the 2 jobs, I was working almost 70 hours a week, which barely left me any time to think about my situation. Every dollar went into a new bank account, without Terrace knowing anything about the small nest egg I was trying to build for the next school year. The physical toll was brutal. Sleeping in the car seat gave me constant back pain. Summers in Boston were stifling and humid, making the nights a torment. I would open the windows a little to let in some air, even though it made me uneasy about safety. Rainy days were the worst. The dampness seeped into the car and seemed to linger. To cope, I organized systems for every aspect of my life. My clothes were stored in vacuum-sealed bags in the trunk. A small portable cooler kept some food fresh. I replenished it with ice daily thanks to the cafeteria, and my laptop and important documents were always with me in a backpack. Once a week she used the laundromat, using that time to read or study. Personal hygiene required creativity. Dry shampoo became indispensable for the days she couldn't make it to the gym before work. Wet wipes were useful for quick cleanups, and I made an effort to maintain a spotless appearance. I knew any lapse could arouse suspicion. I carefully rotated my meager wardrobe so my classmates wouldn't notice I was wearing the same clothes repeatedly. The university library became my refuge. Air conditioning, silence, and free internet access offered me a space to study and, in a way, to relax. I spent most of my free time there, from opening to closing, taking advantage of the study rooms and computer labs. The librarians came to see me as a diligent student, without realizing that I actually had nowhere else to go. Finding restrooms was another challenge. Memorizing which cafes, bookstores, and fast food restaurants allowed entry without purchase became part of my routine. As for food, it had to be practical and economical. I ate whatever was left over at the cafe for breakfast, simple snacks like peanut butter sandwiches or energy bars for lunch, and for dinner I bought salads or ready-made sandwiches at the supermarket, which I ate in the car or on a park bench. As the weeks went by, I managed to adapt to this nomadic lifestyle, although the loneliness weighed heavily on me. I talked to clients and coworkers, but I could never share my true situation. My few friends were away for the summer, and I preferred to avoid their calls rather than lie to them. Pride and shame kept me isolated, determined to get by without help. When the fall semester began, my routine became even harder. I added classes to my workload, organizing my schedule around my academic calendar. Many times I would rush from a morning class to an afternoon session, and then study until the early hours in nearly empty buildings, before returning to my car to sleep. My professors noticed the change. From outstanding students, I went from submitting barely acceptable work, always looking exhausted and less participative in discussions. One day, the marketing professor, Dr. Ramirez, asked me to stay after class. "Jessica, are you okay? Your last essay wasn't up to your usual standard, and you seemed exhausted," she said. I made up an excuse about working longer hours to save money for graduate school. I thanked her for her concern and assured her I could handle it. She didn't seem convinced, though she didn't insist. She did, however, offer to extend the deadline for the next assignment. That small gesture of understanding made me cry silently. With the arrival of the cold weather, the problems increased. Leaving the car heater on all night wasn't an option, as it wasted fuel. I bought a sleeping bag resistant to low temperatures and slept dressed in several layers of clothing. On the coldest nights, I would spend money at a cheap motel, convincing myself it was an investment in my health so I could continue studying and working. I also learned to make the most of university resources. The student center's microwave for heating up meals, lockers in the sports area for storing belongings, and the computer labs for completing my assignments. I never missed a free event with food. I even saved extra portions for later. Despite everything, she maintained a facade of normalcy. To my classmates, I was just another diligent and hard-working student. No one suspected that, after my shifts, I had no home, no bed of my own, and no family support. I'd been living this double life for over 3 months. When fate intervened in the form of Roy, my uncle, I was in the cafeteria during the morning shift, my hair pulled back, my uniform perfectly ironed in a gym bathroom, and a professional smile on my face. The busiest time had passed when I heard a familiar voice order a black coffee. When I looked up, I froze. Standing before me was Roy, older and grayer than I remembered, but unmistakable. He also seemed surprised, frowning as he watched me. "Jessica? Is that you?" he asked incredulously. I nodded, aware of how thin and tired I must look despite my efforts to appear otherwise. "Hi, Uncle Roy. It's been a long time," I replied, with a lump in my throat. I was serving customers in the cafe when I saw him come in. He politely stepped aside to let other customers in and waited until my colleague could cover for me. Then he gestured for me to join him at a table in the corner. My manager, thinking it was a family reunion, allowed me to take a short break. "What are you doing working here?" Roy asked, his tone more concerned than critical. "I thought you were focused on your studies. Terrace told me you were doing well at university." Hearing Terrace's name, a knot of anger coursed through me. "When do you talk to her?" I asked, somewhat suspiciously. "Very rarely, just the occasional courtesy call about business." "We're not close," he replied. She looked at me closely and said in a low voice, "Jessica, you look exhausted. Is everything all right?" Perhaps it was her genuine concern, or perhaps the accumulated weight of months of pretending everything was fine, but something inside me broke. Tears began to fill my eyes, and I hastily wiped them away in shame. "I get off at 2, I whispered. "Can we talk then?" Roy nodded seriously. "I'll be back. We need to talk." Those 4 hours were the longest of my life. When my shift finally ended, I found him waiting in his car, a luxury sedan that made my old Honda look even more pathetic. He suggested we go to lunch, and I took him to a small cafe where the prices were reasonable. During the meal, I completely broke down. I told him how my home was invaded after Dad died, how Terrace took control of my trust, how my bedroom was turned into a gym, how I overheard the conversation where they planned to use my money to save the business, and finally, how I was now surviving by sleeping in my car while working 2 jobs and trying to keep up with my studies. Roy listened without interrupting, but his face grew darker with each detail. When I finished, he remained silent for a few seconds, his hands clasped on the table. "I had no idea," he finally said, his voice thick with anger. "I knew Terrace and I had our differences, but I never imagined she'd go this far with you, with Michael's daughter. I should have been more present after your father died." "This is also my responsibility." "I couldn't have known," I replied, feeling a strange relief at having shared my burden. Roy took my hand firmly and said decisively, "This ends today, Jessica. None of my nieces will live in their cars while that woman steals what belongs to her. Come with me right now." After lunch, he wanted to see my car. His expression turned somber as he inspected my belongings, neatly arranged but in poor condition, a pillow and a blanket on the reclined seat, a small cooler with some food, and the few things I owned stored in the trunk. "This is unacceptable," he declared. "Take what you need for tonight. You're coming to my place." I hesitated, torn between pride and need. "I don't want to be a burden," I said uncertainly. His gaze softened. "You're my family, Jessica, the only thing I have left. You'll never be a burden. Your father would be heartbroken to see you living like this. Let me help you." That night, I slept in a real bed for the first time in months. Roy's house was as majestic as I remembered it, a mansion in one of Boston's most exclusive neighborhoods. He offered me a guest suite with its own bathroom, clean towels, and even a set of pajamas that the housekeeper had found for me. After so much deprivation, that comfort felt overwhelming. The next day, during breakfast, he explained his plan to me. "I've already spoken with my lawyer. We have an appointment at 10. I want you to tell him exactly what you told me yesterday, with all the details about Therese's handling of your trust." The lawyer, Mr. Johnson, was a man with striking features, a piercing gaze, and a reputation as one of the most relentless litigators in the city. He listened attentively to my account, taking meticulous notes and asking pointed questions. "Based on your description," he concluded, "there are strong grounds to request Therese's removal as trustee. Using trust assets for personal or business purposes is a serious breach of her fiduciary duty. The courts are not lenient with those who commingle funds or use them without authorization. And what about what she says about the investments that haven't performed well? Asked. Mr. Johnson smiled coldly. The financial records don't lie, Miss Robert. If Therese diverted money from your trust to the business, there will be a trail. My accounting expert will uncover it. The investigation has moved quickly. Mr. Johnson obtained a court order to review all documents related to my trust and the family business. Roy asked me to focus on my studies while they handled the legal matters, assuring me I could stay at his house for as long as necessary. I reduced my work hours and kept only my job at the coffee shop, which I truly enjoyed. 2 weeks later, Mr. Johnson summoned us to his office. On his desk were bank statements, financial statements, and company records. His expression was stern but satisfied. We found it, she announced. For the past 3 years, Therese has systematically diverted funds from Jessica's trust to the family business. She disguised them as investments, but there are no loan agreements or stock swaps. The company has been losing money for years and has treated the trust as if it were its personal piggy bank. The figures were staggering. Nearly $200,000 had vanished from the funds earmarked for my education, leaving less than a quarter available. Furthermore, Therese had paid herself excessive commissions and used that money to cover personal expenses for herself and her children, Cody and Madison. This goes beyond civil matters, Mr. Johnson continued. There is sufficient evidence to file criminal charges for fraud and embezzlement. The decision is now yours, Jessica. We can pursue criminal charges or focus on recovering the funds through civil action. Either way, Therese will be dismissed immediately. I remember Therese, Cody, and Madison, who never cared about kicking me out of my own home or stealing my inheritance. I remember the nights in my car, the sweltering summer heat, the autumn chill, the endless days of work until my hands were cracked and my feet were wrecked, while they lived comfortably off what my father had left for my future. Both, I answered firmly. I want them to face criminal charges, and I also want my funds back. What they did was unacceptable, and they must face the consequences. The confrontation took place in Mr. Johnson's office. Therese arrived accompanied by a nervous and ill-prepared lawyer. She maintained her composure until they began showing her the evidence. Little by little, her facade crumbled. Those were legitimate investments, she insisted, raising her voice. Michael would have wanted the company preserved for Jessica's future. Attorney Mr. Johnson was direct in his questioning. So why wasn't there a formal investment agreement? He asked firmly. Why were those transfers hidden in the trust's accounting? And why were Cody and Madison's personal expenses being paid with trust funds? Therese's lawyer tried to advise her in a low voice, but she brushed him aside with an irritated gesture. I was just doing what was best for the family, she declared. The business needed capital, and that money was sitting idle. At that moment, I found my voice and answered. It wasn't unused. It was my future. Those funds were meant for my education and safety, not to bail out a failing business or buy Cody a new car. Therese's eyes narrowed in disdain. Always so arrogant, Jessica. Always believing you deserve special treatment just for being Michael's beloved daughter. He spoiled you rotten, and look how you repay his memory, attacking the company he built. Until then, my Uncle Roy had remained silent. Finally, he intervened calmly. The business collapsed because of your mismanagement, Therese, not Jessica's fault. Michael built a profitable company that you bankrupted. And to cover up your mistakes, you stole from his daughter's inheritance. Therese's face contorted with fury. You were always jealous of Michael's success, of his family. That's why you manipulated Jessica against me. You couldn't stand to see me continue her legacy. Roy held her gaze, unfazed. My brother and I had our differences, but I'm sure he'd be horrified by what you've done. Using his daughter's inheritance while she slept in her car isn't honoring her legacy. It's betraying it. The revelation that I had been homeless shocked her for a moment. A look of genuine shock crossed her face before she composed herself. If Jessica chose to live in a car instead of accepting our reasonable house rules, that was her decision, she replied coldly. The meeting concluded when Mr. Johnson presented two alternatives: accept a settlement that entailed her immediate removal as trustee, full restitution of the misappropriated funds, and her resignation from the family business, or face civil and criminal prosecution. Tara's lawyer managed to take her aside, and after a private discussion, they returned. She reluctantly accepted the terms, though her eyes betrayed a promise of revenge. The legal proceedings dragged on for several weeks, but the outcome was decisive. Terrace was removed as administrator, and my Uncle Roy was appointed in her place. The court ordered the full restitution of the misappropriated funds, plus interest. To cover the debt, Terrace was forced to sell her stake in the company, which was placed under professional management until I was ready to decide its future. Although she accepted the plea deal, Terrace faced criminal charges. Based on the evidence gathered by Mr. Johnson, the prosecution proceeded independently. She ultimately accepted a plea agreement that included probation, community service, and a permanent ban on managing funds or trusts in the future. Throughout that time, my Uncle Roy was by my side. He kept urging me to focus on rebuilding my life and finishing my studies, while he took care of the legal and financial matters. One night he told me, "Your father was always the one responsible. I would never have allowed this to happen. The least I can do is help fix it." As the days went by, Roy began to share memories about my father that I didn't know existed. He confessed that they had grown apart after my mother Angela's death, partly because he had never approved of Terrace. "I saw it clearly from the start," he admitted. "But your father was alone and vulnerable after Angela's death. When I tried to warn him, I only managed to push him further away. It's one of my biggest regrets." He also revealed to me that he had been diagnosed with cancer a year before my father passed away. That explained his absence from family life. "I didn't want to burden your father with my illness while he was still grieving for Angela," he explained. "When I finally went into remission, Terrace had already taken too much control, and I ended up being sidelined." Those conversations helped me understand the complex family dynamics that had led me to that situation. They also created a new bond with Roy, a relationship that began to heal some of the emptiness I felt. Thanks to the reinstatement of the trust and the additional compensation from the settlement, I was able to continue my studies without financial worries. I moved to a small but cozy apartment near campus, donated what little I had saved during my time on the streets, and slowly began to feel secure again. The family business, under the professional management Roy had hired, started to recover. The manager sent me regular reports to teach me about the company my father had built, with the idea that I could decide in the future whether to sell it or become actively involved in its management. As for Terrace, Cody, and Madison, they moved to another state. According to acquaintances, they were living in much more humble conditions. Tara's reputation in the business world was destroyed after the trial. I felt no satisfaction, only relief at no longer having them in my life. Rebuilding myself after months of homelessness and years of emotional abuse was not easy. Although my financial security was restored and I had a place to live, the psychological damage remained. Sometimes I would wake up in a panic in my apartment, believing I was still in my car. I stockpiled food and kept an emergency bag ready, unable to fully trust the stability of my new life. My Uncle Roy, aware of these signs of trauma, gently suggested I seek professional help. "There's no shame in asking for support," she told me. "What you went through would leave scars on anyone." With her encouragement, I started therapy with Dr. Martinez, a specialist in family trauma and displacement. In our sessions, I learned to process the loss of my parents, my stepmother's betrayal, and the fear and shame of my time on the streets. She explained that my anxiety and hypervigilance weren't character flaws, but normal responses to extreme circumstances. "You survived something extraordinarily difficult," she would remind me. "The mechanisms that helped you then are no longer necessary now, but they were valuable at the time. We'll work on new tools for your present." With his guidance and Roy's unconditional support, I gradually began to heal. I managed to establish routines that nourished me instead of draining me, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was building a life on my own terms. I reduced my working hours to a reasonable part-time schedule, which allowed me to focus better on my studies instead of competing against them. I learned to cook nutritious meals in my own kitchen and discovered an unexpected pleasure in the simple luxury of preparing food in a safe space. Gradually, my academic performance began to improve as my life situation stabilized. My professors, who had previously noticed my decline, began to comment with surprise on my renewed interest and the quality of my work. Dr. Myres, who had shown me understanding during my most difficult times, became an invaluable mentor, guiding my interest toward business ethics and pointing me toward a possible career path. With Roy, my family relationship took a new turn. Although different from what I had lost, it proved to be equally valuable. We adopted the tradition of having dinner together every Sunday, and at those gatherings he would share stories with me about my father Michael's youth and the beginnings of his businesses alongside him. Thanks to those memories, I was able to construct a more complete image of the man my father had been before sadness transformed him. The legal process against Terry meant much more than financial compensation. It was a validation. The court officially acknowledged the harm I had suffered, confirming that I had neither fabricated nor exaggerated the abuse. That ruling helped counter years of manipulation and character assassination. With the immediate crisis behind me, I began volunteering at a youth hostel, using my experience to support other young people facing the insecurity of homelessness. I understood their pride, their shame, and their desperate need for normalcy in a way that few volunteers could. Without needing to recount my story in detail, I offered genuine empathy and practical advice. Over time, this volunteering turned into a part-time job, coordinating services for homeless college students, an invisible group much larger than many realize. This work healed me and gave me meaning, transforming a painful past into a constructive purpose. My academic focus also shifted. I incorporated courses in nonprofit management and social entrepreneurship into my business studies, envisioning a career that balanced financial success with social impact. For my undergraduate thesis, I researched housing insecurity among university students, highlighting a growing problem and proposing practical solutions. My graduation day was a triumph I once feared I would never achieve. Roy watched proudly from the audience as I walked across the stage to receive my diploma with honors. In that moment, I strongly felt my father's presence, his dream of seeing me graduate fulfilled despite all the obstacles. After graduating, I faced the decision of what to do with the family business. Thanks to Roy's guidance, I already understood both its potential and its challenges. Instead of selling it or immediately taking over management, I opted for a middle ground. I retained ownership but delegated management to an experienced team under clear ethical guidelines and employee-centric policies. I joined the board of directors, intending to learn gradually while forging my own path within the social sphere. The trust that had generated so much conflict was placed under Roy's transparent oversight, with shared decision-making. When I turned 25, I would receive the remaining inheritance, but that thought no longer troubled me. He taught me the financial tools my father never had the chance to share with me, and he prepared me to manage my wealth responsibly. Throughout this recovery process, I learned life-changing lessons. I understood that family is defined by love and loyalty, not just by blood or legal ties. Roy became more like family to me than Therese, despite her marriage to my father. I also learned the value of asking for help, something difficult for someone who had survived by clinging to independence. Accepting Roy's support, Dr. Martinez's guidance, and the company of my friends didn't weaken me. On the contrary, it made me stronger. I understood the insidious nature of emotional abuse, how it distorts reality and destroys self-esteem so slowly that the victim doesn't perceive it until the damage is profound. That understanding made me more compassionate toward others and, at the same time, firmer in my own boundaries. Resilience, I learned, is not about enduring in solitude, but about finding ways to move forward despite the obstacles. Sometimes it means sleeping in a car and showering in a gym. Other times, it means accepting a room and legal help from an uncle who reappears in your life. True strength lies not in the strategy itself, but in the decision not to give up. 5 years after Roy found me working myself to the bone in that coffee shop, my life is nothing like those dark days. Today I have a fulfilling career at a foundation that combats youth homelessness. I own a small but beautiful apartment in a city I love, and I enjoy deep friendships with people who know my whole story and love me just the way I am. My relationship with Roy has enriched both our lives in immeasurable ways. The pain of the past hasn't completely disappeared. I still have moments of mourning for my parents, flashes of anger at Tara's betrayal, and the occasional nightmare about those months in my car. But those shadows no longer dominate my life or define who I am. Now they are just fragments of a story that shaped me, but that doesn't limit my present. I've learned that life doesn't always follow the path we dream of, but that doesn't mean it can't lead us to a better place. My story is no longer that of a lost young woman sleeping in a car, but that of someone who knew how to rebuild her life and give it new meaning. Today, I am not defined by losses or the mistakes of others, but by the strength I found within myself to transform that pain into a driving force. And if I ever feel doubts returning, I only need to look around, at my achievements, at the people who walk alongside me, and at the certainty that even from the hardest experiences, strong roots and a bright future can emerge.